the Austin Automation Professionals. Today, we're about 6 months into running our meetup by Zoom and GoToWebinar and all that stuff. And so I know that it's pretty difficult, and we all get kind of Zoom fatigue and don't want to sit on yet another call, because that seems to be all I do these days. But I just want to thank you guys so much for joining us today. As mentioned, we will be recording this and we'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel, which we have been trying to put the last few ones on. As you can probably see behind me, I'm back in the ESO office a couple of days a week. So that's pretty fun for me. And so hopefully that kind of bodes well for the future. Obviously, at the moment, we can't have any external visitors or anything like that, nor would we want to take the risk of putting a bunch of people in a space and put people at risk and all that. I think there's about 10 people who are in the office today, but I'm back. But yeah, so thank you guys again for joining us. We're going to keep these going probably noon until we can get back in the office. So next month, or over the next little bit, we're going to have some folks from Sauce Labs talking with us. We got some pen testing coming up. So we've got some really cool sessions coming up in the near future. But today I want to welcome Angie Jones back, who is one of the folks, senior developer advocate, I think is the right principal developer advocate rather, at Apple Tools, and Java extraordinaire. If you check out her blog, she has just a ton of resources there on how to do what we do in Java in particular. So it's a great resource, and has a lot of the classes on Test Automation University, which actually I point a lot of our, especially junior SDETs over to Test Automation U to get started. So it's a great resource for you. If you haven't checked that out, I would highly suggest it. But let's all give a virtual round of applause to Angie Jones.
Thank you so much, Joel. Hi, everyone. I'm Angie. As Joel has alluded to, I love Java, right? I was recently named a Java champion, which is like the highest distinguishment you can get in the industry. So I'm really serious about Java programming. Also, I teach free courses at Test Automation University, including a Java programming course. So if you want to learn the language or you know someone who needs to learn it. Also, selenium-webdriver with Java, visual testing with Java, as well as a couple of others. Okay, so while Java is still the leading programming language, it's gotten a bad rep over the years, right? So some of the biggest gripes that I've heard are things like Java's too verbose, meaning we have to write a lot of code to do the most basic of things. I've heard that the language was not evolving fast enough. So the releases of Java 7, 8, and 9 were all 3 years apart, which is almost a lifetime in software development time, right? Fortunately, the powers that be have heard us loud and clear, and Java has gotten a much needed makeover. And now new versions of the language are being released every 6 months. And with new features every 6 months, it's hard to keep up with what's new and what's going on with the language. So that's what I want to cover in this talk. I want to demonstrate with some code samples some of the newer features of Java and how we can take advantage of them in writing our test code. So what we're going to do is look at some automation code for verifying this banking page. And the specific test we'll go over today is just going to make sure that all of the accounts are listed here. Okay, so here's our test code. Let me walk you through it. Here we're logging into the application, and we get a handle to this accounts overview page. And this is where that table of accounts is located. And next, we get a list of the account numbers that are displayed on the page. Then we want to get the expected accounts. So this test data can change. So we're actually going to make a call to an API to get the expected accounts, and that will return a list of the serialized account objects. So we want to make a new list, which will only contain the account numbers as strings as opposed to the entire account. And we're going to loop through the list of account objects and then add the account number from each account into our list of expected accounts. And then finally, we compare both lists to make sure that every account for this customer is actually shown on the site. All right. So this test was written in Java 8. So we're going to go through it and we're going to see how we can modernize it using some of the latest features in Java, because we're all the way up to Java 15 now, even though most people are still on Java 8. All right. So let's see what folks are missing out on. Let's start here with the declaration of the accounts overview page. And as you can see here, we're following Java conventions, right? We're using good names for both our class and our object. However, many times, as we see here, these two names end up being the same thing. So this is redundant, right? It makes for more typing than we would want to do. So in version 10, Java introduced type inference for local variables. And what this means is that instead of explicitly declaring the object or the variable's type, we can instead use this keyword var. And Java will infer what the type is based on what's being assigned to it. Now, this is my favorite new feature in Java because, as you all know, in test code, we always have like these long class names for our page models, and we no longer need to type all of that out. So it's great. But before you get carried away, you start using var everywhere, let me explain the rules and also give you some tips. Now, this does not make Java a dynamically typed language like JavaScript or Python. The type is still there. It's just inferred from the right-hand side of the statement, which means that you can only use var if you're actually initializing the variable, right? Otherwise, Java's not going to be able to infer what the type is. Also, it only works for local variables. So you can use this inside of methods, loops, decision structures, but you cannot use this for global variables, even if you're initializing them. Now, while local variable type inference can be used within the body of local constructs, it cannot be used in headers of like methods or constructors, right? And this is because if we think about it, whoever's calling you, they need to know the data type of the arguments that they need to send. So we can't just leave this up to chance, right? So those are the rules. Now let me get to some guidelines. Now, given this variable name and this method name, I have no idea what the inferred data type of X would be, right? Yes, Java knows because Java knows the signature of the getX method, so it knows the return type, yada, yada, yada. But me as the reader, I can't easily tell what this is, right? So this makes it difficult to work with this variable without having to do like additional exploration to determine what is this. So the message here, you should always use good variable names like all the time, but it's even more important if you're going to use var. Once you start using var, you're going to love it, but please don't overdo it, right? So using var here in this case, this doesn't do you any favors, right? Like int is 3 letters, var is 3 letters. You didn't save anything here. You only added a bit of ambiguity to the number of accounts variable, right? So use it when you need to use it, but don't just like use it all the time. Okay, so I've updated our test method to use vars. So here I'm using var in the inferred type. Is very clear to me as the reader because of the variable name that I chose. Yay me. However, here I changed the variable name. It was actual accounts. I changed it to actual accounts ID list so that it's clear. This is a list and it's holding the account IDs. So as you can see, when you move away from actually using the type, there's a little bit of ambiguity there. So yeah, it saves you some typing, but you need to make sure that that variable name is really clear. All right. For this one, I also changed the name from accounts to accounts list so that it's clear. This is a list holding account objects. Here I changed the name to be more representative, and I also explicitly define the data type of the array list on the right-hand side. Now, if I didn't use this diamond operator to indicate that this was a list of strings, then this would be inferred as a list of objects, which that's okay in this case, right? But it could get me in trouble down the road. Say, for example, I wanted to get one of the elements from the expected account IDs list and I wanted to use the dot operator and access one of the string methods. I wouldn't be able to do that because if I didn't have string explicitly declared on that right-hand side, again, this would be inferred as a list of objects. So when I use the dot operator, it's going to give me the methods from the object class, not the string class. So that's why I explicitly declared that this would be inferred, but it's going to be strings. All right. Okay, and then here I'm using var inside of a for loop just to show you that it can be done. Okay, let's see what else we can modernize. How about let's look inside of this get accounts method. Now remember, this is the table, and we're getting all of those values in the first column labeled accounts. And here's the code to do so. We see here, it finds all of the account sales, and these are web elements. And then it creates a new list to hold just the text of the web elements. So this is a list of strings. And to populate that list, we loop through each of the elements from line 3. We get their text, and then we add them to our new list from line 6. And again, this is Java 8. Notice we need 2 lists and a loop. Of course, there's a more modern approach to do this in Java. And the way to do that is using a functional programming style. So this is something that was added in Java 8. I don't see it leveraged that much in test code. So I want to highlight it a bit, all right? So this is much more streamlined. Here, we still called find elements to get the list of web elements, but we don't need to store them. Instead, we turn them into a stream. And then from here, we can do some cool functional programming, right? So the stream is essentially a way to get the data in a state that it's easy to process that data using additional methods like the one here called map. So this map function will take those web elements and then it's going to map them into whatever is passed into this method, right? So here we're saying get the text from these web elements and then store them into a list which we return. Okay. All right. So here's an alternative way to write that same map call. Notice in the top example, line 5 uses a shortcut or what's called syntactic sugar. So it's using those 2 colons. So it's basically saying from the web element class, : get text. So that's saying basically call that method from this class. And in the bottom example, line 3 uses the fully spelled out approach where you kind of define this element as E. You use the lambda style arrow to say, okay, I want to do something with E. And from there, I say E.getText. So both of these do exactly the same thing, just different ways of writing them. Okay, so we can do the same thing in our test method. We can, instead of using the 2 lists in a for loop, here I changed it to use a stream and then map what I need into a single list. So much more streamlined, pun intended. All right. Now, it's a good practice to break up these chain method calls where each method call is on a new line, right? It's really tempting to do this big, powerful call that I have in the first one, because it's like, wow, look at this wicked one-liner I have, and you feel good and powerful, and, I did everything in one line of code. But that makes it harder to read your code and harder to process what it's actually doing, right? Also much harder to debug. So it's a good practice to break it up so that each call is on a new line. And some of the IDEs, I know IntelliJ for sure, will allow you to put breakpoints on those sub calls. So that's pretty neat and a good reason to break it up like that. All right, let's look at what's new with streams. So Java 9 introduces a couple of new methods to stream, one being take while. So let's say I have this code which gets the list of accounts and then uses the take while method on this stream of accounts, right? So within the take while method, you pass in a condition, also known as a predicate. And this is saying to go through this list of accounts and accept all of the ones that have a type of checking until you get to one that does not have this type. So here are all of the accounts that are stored in accounts list. And notice there are 11 of them. And when we say take while type is checking, we end up with a list of 3 accounts. And as you can see, it's the first 3 accounts from the accounts list. But when we got to the 4th account, the type was savings. So the stream ended, even though there were more checking ones. Okay. Java 9 also introduced drop while, which does the opposite of take while. So for this one, we're saying drop the accounts of type checking until you get to one that's not. So with 11 accounts here, we see the first 3 are checking, the 4th is savings, the 5th through 9th are checking, the 10th is savings, and the last one is checking. So how many accounts do you think are going to be collected here in the checking accounts list? If you said 8, you are correct. So this method dropped the first 3 accounts because they matched the predicate. And then it stopped the stream once it got to one that did not match. So all other accounts are then collected and stored inside of the list. And all of those accounts couldn't fit on the last slide. So here's all 8 of them for when we call drop while account type is checking. All right. So you may be thinking, Angie, why on earth would I want to use take while and drop while, right? Well, the examples I showed you were a bit of a a bit of a tease, right? Because the lists weren't sorted. So the results were indeterministic. However, if you sort the collection first, as we're doing here, it makes a lot more sense. And notice I'm using this comparator to specify which property I want this object sorted by, right? So I'm saying sort all of this by the type on account. And given the sorted list, we see then take while will collect all of the checking accounts, and this actually makes a lot more sense. Likewise for drop while. All right. So let's see what else we can modernize in our test. How about we go inside of this customer ID method? So this method is holding our test data, and based on the name on the account, it's returning the account ID. So this is using switch statement. And notice we have to declare the variable, and then we specify each case we want to handle. So inside of the case, we assign the value to ID, and then we follow the assignment with a break statement to prevent fall through into the next case, which would override the variable, right? So notice this is not only like a lot of boilerplate code, it's also risky. If you forget one of those break statements, then you're going to return the wrong ID. And this has happened to me before, but not too long ago, ashamed to admit. And it's probably happening to you as well. You know, you're typing this out, you forget one of those break statements, and boom, you have a bug just like that. In Java 12, switch expressions were introduced. Now you can use switch to directly assign a value to a variable. So notice here, we're using switch on the right side of a statement to initialize a variable. The case statement doesn't need a colon in switch expressions. Instead, it uses an arrow. And this is saying if the name is John, then assign 12212 to the variable ID, which is on the left side, right? Notice I don't need a break statement because there is no fall through with switch expressions. And I can even simplify this a bit more by removing the assignment here and just simply returning the result of the switch expression. Now, using the lambda style arrows is one way to assign the value, but you can also use another approach. So you can use the colon that we're used to, but you need to follow it with the word yield. And I'll tell you a little bit more about yield in a moment, all right? But with the colon yield, this is a bit more verbose, so I prefer to use just the arrow. Now you can specify more than one case in the switch expression. So notice here, we're saying if the customer name is John or if the customer name is Demo, which is his last name, then the ID is 12212. So this makes up for the removal of fall through from switch expressions because you can indicate all of the cases delimited by a comma. Okay. Now you can do more than just assign values. For example, here we're using the lambda style arrow, but we follow that by a set of curly braces to indicate that we want to do more here. And inside of the body of this case, we add more statements like this one, but that last line, and this is where yield comes into place, the last line of the case must yield a value back to be returned, right? Because again, switch expressions are all about assigning values. So you can do whatever you want. Maybe you need to do some calculation, some input output, whatever you need to do. But the end of that case, you better yield a value back because this is for assignment. Okay. All right, let's talk about the rules. So you'll need to use the arrows or the colon yield. You can't use both of these in combination, right? So line 3 is going to give you a compilation error because it's a different kind of case than the initial one. You can use the yield with the arrows, but only in events like the last case where you were using the curly braces to execute multiple statements within that case. And you can use any of the cases to throw an exception. So of course, in this case, no value is returned for ID. The entire flow is interrupted by the exception. Now, I put the exception here in a default case because that makes the most sense, but you can throw an exception from any of the cases. So if you wanted to throw an exception in the case of Mary, you could very well do that. Any exception you want. You can also have multiple exceptions in the different cases. So I could have Mary throw an exception as well as default throw an exception, right? So there's no limit there. Now, this is not a replacement of the switch statement. It's an addition to the language, meaning you can still use switch statements, and in some cases, that's the more favorable option. As a rule of thumb, use expressions when you are using the switch to assign a value, and use switch statement when you're not using switch to assign values, but to invoke statements, okay? All right, so let's get back to our test. And how about we go to this get accounts method, which is an API call. So this method is making a get call to get all of the accounts for the specified customer. And it's then deserializing the response into an array of account objects. Okay, so let's look at the API response for this call. Notice here we have an array of these account objects, and each account has an ID, customer ID, type, and balance. So I have this Pojo class, which is plain old Java objects, meaning just some fields and some getter and setter methods. And that's all it has. Now, for any of you who have created Pojos, you know that this is a tedious thing to do. And many people have moved to using the Lombok external library so that they don't have to write all of this. But in Java 14, a new construct has been introduced called records. So this is a record, much shorter than that Pojo, right? Notice here, instead of using the word class, we use the word record. Also, as opposed to opening this with a curly brace, we use parentheses to declare the fields. And then you specify the fields and their data types in this comma delimited list. And then you close it with a closing paren and a set of curly braces. And that's it. You don't need to make any getters or setters. You don't need to override the inherited methods of equals or hash code or toString. You don't have to do anything. This is enough, and it's all just done for you, and it's done quite nicely. However, if you just want to override anything or you want to add additional methods to the record, you can do so by opening up those curly braces, and then you can slap in whatever you want to put in right there. Okay. Now, records can be instantiated just like classes. So account is the name of our record, and we use the new keyword, and we call the constructor passing in all of the values. The fields of a record are final, however. So there are no set methods that are generated for records. Of course, you can add a setter within the curly braces of the record, but I don't really see a good reason to do that since the fields are final and they cannot be modified anyway, right? So records are not like a good construct to use for, say, like a builder class or something like that. I think you'll be better suited to just use your regular class for that. But, in the cases where you don't need to set any values other than the initial set, then records are a good alternative. Now, you do have accessor methods. However, they don't start with the word get. Instead, the accessor method name is the same as the field name. So notice here we have account.balance as opposed to account.getBalance. Records were released as a preview feature in the last version of Java, which was Java 14, and that was in March. And notice I said last version. So last version was in March, and we're already on a new version, Java 15, which was released last week, maybe this week. September 15th was the date. What's today? 24th. So yeah, last week, Java 15 came out. But it was a preview feature. It's still a preview feature in Java 15 as well. We got the second preview of records. And what this means by preview feature, it means that it's not yet a permanent feature of the language. So it's just available for us engineers to play around with and offer feedback. And then based on that feedback, the implementation can change, right? So I say all that to say, don't use this in production code just yet, because it's not permanent. It can be taken away or it can be changed. That also means that support from external libraries might not be available just yet. For example, the Jackson library is used to deserialize that JSON response into this record. However, the Jackson library last I checked, they didn't officially support records just yet because it's not a permanent feature, right? So as a hack, I needed to explicitly bind each field to its respective JSON property. And then when and if records becomes permanent, I know the Jackson project will provide support so that the explicit binding isn't necessary. In fact, I saw some tickets out on that project and a couple of tweets that they were working on support for this. So that's a great sign. All right, next I want to show you text blocks. So let's continue on with the API. Now, what if instead of calling the API, we just wanted to use some mock data right there in the API util class? To represent this whole thing as a string, it's going to be very tedious. So we need to escape all of the fields because they were already in quotation marks. We need to add new line characters for each line break, and we need to add the plus signs for each line. So this is ugly to read and it's ugly to write, right? Text blocks allow you to use 3 quotation marks to open and close a big block of text. Notice, you don't need to escape anything. The individual quotation marks are still there on the fields and the line breaks are respected. Now, let me tell you a little bit more. Text blocks were introduced in Java 13 as a preview feature. We got a second preview in Java 14, and I'm happy to announce that text blocks have become a permanent feature in the latest release, Java 15, which again came out last week. So this is like your newest addition to the language, cutting edge stuff right here, and it's really nice. All right, now let's go to some rules and some guidelines. So text blocks allow you to represent this whole thing. Wait, where am I? Hold on. Yeah, we talked about that. Okay, here we go. So text blocks cannot include like the entire text on the same line, or you're going to get a compilation error, right? And when you think about this is for like big blocks of text. So you shouldn't try to put that all on one line, right? In this example, I have like just this short text here. I wouldn't do this in real life. I only use this because I needed to fit like all of this on one slide, but basically you can't put it all on one line. And then a new line must be after the opening quotes, like in this second example, which is legal, but this is also not the preferred way because that looks a little goofy, right? The preferred way is to have both the opening and the closing quotes aligned on their own respective lines. Okay? All righty. One more thing I want to show you in that API class. Let's say that we didn't want the entire response, but we wanted to just return like a hard-coded list of the expected account IDs. So the old way of doing this would be to use the arrays.asList method. However, in Java 9, this of method was introduced for all entities in the collection framework. So lists, maps, sets, all of that good stuff. So this one seems small, but I've actually been enjoying it. And I think the reason for that is because it's more natural, right? Before it took like this slight cognitive effort to recall like, which class do I use to make a quick list? Is it array? Is it arrays, plural? Like, what is it? But now I want a list, I call list.of. I want a map, I call map.of. Nice and straightforward. And speaking of maps, populating these used to require a separate method call for each item that we wanted to add to the collection. But now you can define a map all with one line of code. So the parameters are key followed by value. And you see here, we have 3 entries in this one line. Now, one thing to note about using the of method is that it creates collections which are immutable. And what this means is that the collection cannot be changed by adding, removing, or sorting it later. So only use this when your collection won't require any changes later on in the program. Okay. And then another thing to note, let me go back. I want to, even though I'm showing you this as a one-liner, again, I just kind of was flexing a little bit, getting it out of my system because we like to write a one-liner. But in real life, I wouldn't write this all on one line. It would still be the one method call, but I would break up each key value pair to its individual lines, again, so that you don't get confused and it's really easy to quickly see like which key goes with which value. All right, great. So there you have it. Those are a few of my favorite new features from recent versions of Java. I've been using them in different projects. I find them quite useful even for test automation code. What questions can I answer for you?
I'm just bringing up the questions now. Just give me a moment. It actually looks like we don't have any questions so far. Most of them were about the recording. But yeah,
Okay.
a lot of that stuff with like the record and stuff, that looks really cool. Like I really want to use those.
Yeah, it was the records were really nice. I can go to some frequently asked questions I get if you want to do that, and there's some stuff that wasn't necessarily in my presentation, but I get these questions often.
Sure, let's start there.
All right.
And then if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or use the question within GoToWebinar, and I'll read those out as those come in over the next few minutes.
Okay. All right. So let's see. One question I get is about like upgrading. So people are using like Java 8 and they want to upgrade to a more modern version, but not sure which one. Like I say, they're coming out every 6 months. So the question might be like, well, okay, well, which version should I upgrade to? So Java has LTS versions, which are long-term support. And those are the ones, if you're going to, if you're not just playing around like I'm doing, like playing around with new features, but you're actually wanting to, write your test on a stable version, then I recommend updating to an LTS version. The current LTS version is Java 11, and the duration of that LTS is for 3 years. So that's saying, Java 11 is the long-term support for 3 years, right? And so that's the one I would recommend. Even though we're on 15 now, Java 11 will be your most sturdy language. And with that, you'll get some of the features I talked about today, not all of them. Like you won't get text blocks, you won't get records, and you won't get switch expressions, but you do get the var, which came out in Java 10. You get the take while and the drop while stuff. All right. Another question I often get is about licensing. So Oracle has moved to like a licensing model for Java, and how does that affect us? So for test code, we're pretty much exempt from that. If you're not shipping your tests as part of the product that goes out to your customers, then you're okay. You're just using it in-house. So you can use the Oracle version of Java without having to worry about paying for a license to write your test code. Also, there is an open source version of Java. I don't know if many people know this, but it's called OpenJDK. So it has all of the same good stuff of Java, but it's open source and there's no licensing and stuff involved with it at all. So you can download your JDK from there as well. Okay. Any questions yet? I have more.
Yeah, we did have one.
Okay.
One of the questions was about functional programming, and they're comparing to kind of what they're doing in Scala, like map and collect, things like that. What other like feature comparables do they have in newer versions of Java to functional programming?
There's quite a bit. like the whole Java 8 was like it was like a reset of the language, really. Like the stream stuff was like the biggest thing, and there's a whole bunch of functions that come under stream. So filter, the map, like we said, like we would look at today. There's a whole bunch like that. That's a whole talk in and of itself. I do recommend, there's lots of resources, like there's talks, there's like books just on Java 8. There's online courses and things like that. So it's really, really heavy.
Right.
And if you're a Java programmer and you're looking, like a lot of people are on 8, like I was saying, they're on 8. But in test code, I still don't see them like taking advantage of a lot of this functional programming style, right? And I'm not trying to push it. You know, you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but definitely explore it to see, like, are there some enhancements I can make or anything that makes my life easy? I know for me, like some of the examples I showed today where I'm getting away from like using multiple data storage is like lists and loops and all of this stuff, and I can streamline that quite a bit by using the functional programming.
Great. How would you rate Kotlin compared to Java? And would you recommend it for test automation?
That's funny. Okay, so these days I cannot mention my love for Java without someone coming and asking me about Kotlin.
Right.
And I'm usually like fussing at the folks on Twitter because I'm like, "Ooh, look at this cool new feature in Java." And then somebody it's just gonna happen. Somebody's going, "Oh, nice to see Java catching up to Kotlin," or "Have you tried Kotlin?" or whatever. So those people have turned me off so much that I haven't even tried Kotlin yet, to be honest. And I tell them, like, y'all keep shoving it down my throat and it makes me not want to try it because I don't want to become like you where I'm just like kind of bombarding people with this all the time. But I don't know. So the answer to that is I don't know because I haven't tried Kotlin, but I am going to try it eventually. Hopefully I don't become one of these Kool-Aid drinkers where, nothing else matters but Kotlin. But people seem to really like it, is what I'll say. They like shove it on you all the time. I don't know of anyone who's actually using Kotlin for test automation. Most of the people that are doing this are using it for their development. I don't know about for automation. I do believe the Java or JVM frameworks like Selenium and stuff support Kotlin. Pretty sure, but I just haven't tried it yet. Would be super interested if anybody had like any Kotlin test frameworks that they've written or they have examples on GitHub. I'd be super interested to look at that.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it yet either. What about so whenever we're dealing with jars, so say our Selenium WebDriver and all that good stuff, if we do upgrade, is all that backwards compatible?
Yes, Java has done a really great job with backwards compatibility. So I've not had any issues, but again, I'm always kind of like on the bleeding edge. So I update from one version to the next, meaning I'm already on 14. 15 has just come out. So when I upgrade, it's going to be from 14 to 15. What I have not done is something like, oh, I'm on Java 7 and now I'm trying to update to Java 15 or, I've not tried that. Now, there is a lady, her name is Trisha G-E-E, and Trisha, Trisha. So Trisha, she talks about like gotchas and things like that with upgrading and migrating. So if you're going to make a big jump, like it's not just a 1 or 2 version jump, you're going to make like a 7 to 15 or like a 8 to 11 kind of jump. I recommend that you look up her work. So she has articles, she has talks, she has blog posts, so whatever format you need it in, she has you covered, and she has like some gotchas listed and some things to look out for when you're upgrading your versions.
Cool. I think that's it for questions so far.
All
If you
right.
have some more on your FAQ, well, more
I
feel free.
do have some more on my FAQ. So, one question I get about the switch expressions. So in the example I showed, we were assigning a value to a variable, and folks asked, can you assign more than one value, right? Two values to a variable. One value to two variables, right? So yes, you can do this with the switch expression. So remember how I had string ID equals switch, right? You could do string ID, comma, customer ID equals switch or whatever. So you would just delimit all of the variables that you want to assign the value to with a comma. All right. Another question I get about records is like with overloading and inheriting and all of this stuff. So you can overload methods within records just like you would in a class. So that's where you have multiple methods with the same name, but they just have different parameters. So that's perfectly legal in a record. As far as inheriting or implementing interfaces or anything like that, so let me tell you how that works with records. For the records are final. So when you make a record, they're final, right? What that means is that you're not going to be able to extend a class. So you cannot inherit from another class while using a record. You're going to get a compilation error. So you can't extend from a class, nor can you extend from another record. You just can't do that. However, you can implement interfaces. So that's allowed to do. Okay. Let me see any other questions. People ask about serialization with records. And so I talked in my talk about deserialization, but yep, you can also do serialization. It's just a matter of using the constructor just like you would do with a class. And then there was another question about typecasting. So there was a new feature, and I haven't used this other than just initially playing around with it, but I haven't actually used it in any code. But it's the instance of pattern. So this is where you're using like polymorphism, and you want to see if one of your objects is an instance of another object. So before you would do something like if object A is an instance of object B, and then you would do whatever you want to do, right? Now you can kind of short circuit that a bit, and it goes if object A is an instance of, and then you put whatever the type or the object is, followed by a variable name. And all of that goes inside of the if statement. Let me see if I can show you guys an example right quick. Here we go. So, that didn't make, this is the one I'm talking about right here. So notice this is the second example. So instead of this, you can do this. All right. So that's another new feature. I think that came out in Java, either Java 13 or 14. Java 14. That came out in Java 14. So fresh new stuff. Java 15, what came out in this release? There was nothing that I saw that was immediately like, oh, that would be useful for test code. That's why I haven't upgraded yet. It's been a week and I'm behind the ball. But there was one thing called hidden classes that I want to look into. I don't think it'd be useful for test automation, but it sounded interesting and like something I should know. So that's what's in 15, in addition to the permanent feature of text blocks. Yay. All right, so that's all the facts I have.
All right. One person mentioned, since you were just talking about the pattern matching on your instance of, do they support pattern matching in the switch cases?
Huh. I haven't tried that, but I don't see why not. That should
Right.
be perfectly legal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions that we have? We've covered all of them so far. So maybe we'll give it another minute or two.
What version of Java are people using? Go ahead and type in what you're using
Yeah,
for
send
your
it in the
test
chat
code.
or the question, or the question, whatever's easier for you. I guess I could have set up a poll. That would have been a good idea. A couple are using 8 still. Yeah.
8, yeah. Everybody's still on 8. Are there any of the features that I talked about today that are like, oh wow, I'm missing out on that? Anything excites you?
Lauren Christensen is on 11, so we do have a few people on newer versions.
Nice. The folks who are on 11, are you using var?
Oh, no, they are not using var yet, so still strongly typed.
Okay, use that var. Go on, use that var.
Yeah.
Give it a spin. See what you think. Yeah,
Somebody's
once I
mentioning,
started, I just could not stop using it. I was just like, and I had to like now ask myself, like, is this a appropriate use
yeah,
appropriate use of var, or am I just overdoing it?
it feels weird probably doing it in Java after so long. One
Yeah,
person says it
then it
reminds them of
starts
Go.
feeling like you start feeling powerful or something,
Yeah,
Joel. It's like, man, look at me. You just feel like, oh, I'm coding so much faster. Now that now I have to type everything out.
yeah, for sure. Aaron says that sometimes it feels like they're being lazy by using the bar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I've noticed that too. Whether because we use TypeScript a lot currently in our automation now, and like I try generally to strongly type, but yeah, sometimes you can get yourself into an issue if you're not setting up your types and you're just using bars.
Yeah. Get yourself in a little pickle.
Yeah, exactly. But it sure seems like Java has come a long way. Of course, the last time I was using it, I think 7 was was still fairly new, or we hadn't actually switched over to 8, and so there were a lot of languages did have a bit of felt like they had a leg up when people were talking about them,
Yeah.
but it sure seems like they've come a long way over the last few years.
Yeah, they really have. And it's so funny, Joel, because the whole reason they moved to these frequent release cycles is because everybody's like, oh my God, the language is getting so dated and we don't get anything new and blah blah blah. And so then they were like, oh, you want something new? Okay. And it's like every 6 months we have these new releases. And now I see on the Java Twitter handle, they'll be like, oh, Java 15 has come out. And instead of everybody celebrating in the comments, everybody's in there like, another release? Oh my God, I can't keep up. And it's like, oh my goodness, you can't please people.
That's
It's
true.
like, but I like it. It's fun and it's refreshing. And yeah, you might can't keep up, but I pick a few things from each release that pique my interest based on the work that I do, and I explore those. So it keeps me really excited about Java, and I enjoy seeing the new releases.
We did get one question came in. So is there any additional overhead to using functional programming methods as opposed to traditional looping?
No, they've done a great job with the performance and optimizing. So if you're going to use, like, say for example, streams, and you have like this big huge collection or whatever, I think that is probably depending on what you're doing with the stream, right? But in general, it's more efficient than trying to loop through this or something like that using the old technique. So there's definitely some benefits. In some cases it might be equal. A few rare cases you'll see like a deterioration on trying to use like the functional approach over the traditional approach, but for most cases, it'll be more optimal.
I guess it's more just kind of changing your mindset a little bit from kind of that traditional way to really thinking
Yeah,
more of functional.
it is. In the first, couple of months or year or so, maybe even, you're Googling a lot more. So if you're really proficient in Java already, you're used to just kind of coding without having to look stuff up. So now it's like, oh crap, this I recognize this would be a good case for a stream. I don't know all my stream functions. Here's what I want to do, and let me go Google how to do that. So that's how I've been learning. I haven't taken like an official, even though I want to, you just can't find the time for all the things you want to do, right? But I want to like learn. I did do like a workshop on all the methods and stuff or the functions that are available like on that stream API. It's so many and it's so hard to try to remember them all. So that's what I've been doing. Is like, okay, I recognize that this is a good opportunity for functional programming. I don't know by heart which ones I'm supposed to be calling. Let me go and Google it, and then I get to learn more about the stream API.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's part of it. I think a lot of us like to fall back into the thing we've always done, but
Yeah,
it like jumps your game up when you can, manage both worlds.
exactly.
So we talked a little bit about var. So specifically, like where we cannot use them, say in our constructors and things like that.
Hmm.
But one question is from Lauren is how do you determine when not to use var? So not like can't, but shouldn't.
Yeah. So if you're okay, so like the example I showed with the ints, right? So I would
Hmm.
never use var for int period, basically, because it doesn't make sense. Like, so I don't use it for the primitive data types. String, var, well, not really string. Is string a primitive data type? Maybe not. But like ints, float, double, all that stuff, I don't use it. I use it when it's a big object name, a big class name, or if the class name is so descriptive that my variable name is going to end up being the exact same thing, right? So login page is the class name and login page is the object. Okay, that's a good case to just say var login page versus login page.
Hmm.
um, so like where I wouldn't use it, again, primitive data types, I wouldn't use it if the class name is already short. Like say the class name is page, right? And then I'm giving my variable name something else, then that's fine. I probably wouldn't use it in that case. Or, if my variable name is not that descriptive, like say I want to use the long class name, but then I want to use a shorter variable name, I would go ahead and type the whole thing out for the long class name versus var so that I have that context there for the shorter variable name. But in my example, notice that I changed my variable names when I used var as opposed to vice versa. So
Any other questions? We're a couple minutes over. Thanks for hanging in with us for a couple extra minutes. So now you do have a lot of this in some of the slides for this talk and some of these Q&A examples on your blog, right?
I do. So my blog is angiejones.tech.
Mm-hmm.
And There I have these slides. I have the GitHub link if you want to download this code and play with it. And then, yeah, I also have some frequently asked questions and answers. Also on this deck is the Test Automation University link. So I'm just going to highlight that really quickly again.
Yep.
If you're wanting to learn about test automation or anything, come over there. It's not just for juniors. I have a lot of seniors. We are up to maybe about 65,000 students. So everybody's over there. If you're not, you're missing out on the party. But you learn all of these different things. So there's UI test stuff, there's API test, there's mobile test, there's, AI and all of these things. So I take the courses there as well myself, and I consider myself an expert in test automation, but none of us know everything. For example, the Cypress course, right? So I've been using Selenium for most of my career. Okay, I want to learn Cypress. I can go to Test Automation University. And all of these courses are absolutely free, and they're sponsored by Amplitude, so that's why they're free. So you don't have to pay anything. You go there. They're self-paced video courses. I personally vet all of the instructors. So these are other industry leading experts who you know and love as well, who are teaching these things. So definitely check it out. Today we just released a new course on Android automation with Espresso. So you're a Java person, you want to learn maybe some mobile automation, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, so there's everything from more advanced stuff, and there's performance tests classes in there, and even real basic stuff like this is one thing I point all of my juniors to, and this is something that maybe I'd suggest for you guys as well. As basic as Git, like just normal, like how to use Git. One of the first classes on there is like setting a foundation for successful test automation. And before anybody even jumps into your programming language choice, especially as a new person, like that is a class that every single one of our junior people take.
Good. Yep. And there's learning paths there as well. So if you have some new folks and they're like, I want to learn automation, I don't even know where to begin, there's learning paths. So you go there, you pick a language, and you pick a discipline. So I want to do Java for UI automation. Boom, here's a whole list of the classes in order that you should take them. So good stuff.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys again for joining us. Sorry, this type which course. 1 second. I will do that. I'll just throw that into the chat before we close this down. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Angie, for joining us again virtually. Hopefully, next time we have a conference or something and you're in town, you can join us in person. That'd be great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks, guys, for joining with us. As I mentioned, we do have some stuff planned coming up for October and November. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do for December. Normally we have a kind of a joint thing with Cloud Austin, and so we already kind of have that going, but we kind of want to get something a little bit of a social time as well, even if it's just all of us on Zoom kind of talking about something. We'll see how things are going, obviously at that point. But again, we've got stuff coming up. We have, I believe we have Titus from SauceUps coming over. We have Julie is going to be doing a presentation on penetration testing, which is something that, is really cool. We're actually in the middle of doing here at ESO right now. So yeah, it'll be the last Thursday of every month. We will be doing it at noon, just like we are here. So keep an eye out for that. One thing that I will say, this is a bit of a shameless plug. We do have an opening for an SDET role here at ESO. So if you're looking for work or looking for a change, please reach out to me. We have a Slack channel that you can join. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Any of those things are on Meetup as well. Feel free to do that. And I think that concludes our session. I will drop those in the chat before we close it out, and we'll leave it. But thank you guys so much, and have a great day.